What if the government is hiding creatures more terrifying than we can imagine? Creatures that aren't supposed to exist, kept locked away in remote, heavily guarded zones far from prying eyes. Cryptids, beings that defy logic and explanation. From Sasquatch and Dogman to Skinwalkers and Mothman, these mysterious creatures have haunted folklore and eyewitness accounts for centuries. But what if they're more than just stories? What if the government knows the truth and is keeping them contained? Disappearances, fences, armed patrols. These are the hallmarks of what some call cryptid containment zones. And the question is, what's really hiding behind the barriers? To understand cryptid containment zones, we first need to look at the patterns. Reports of strange creatures and unexplainable events aren't scattered randomly. They're concentrated in specific areas. These zones are often near national parks, remote forests, or regions surrounded by secrecy. Witnesses describe hearing unnatural sounds, seeing shadowy figures, or finding barriers deep in the wilderness where no fences should exist. Some even claim to have been warned off by armed individuals with no clear affiliation. It raises the question, are these zones meant to keep people out or to keep something far more dangerous in? Disappearances in these areas are unsettling, with hundreds of cases reported where people have vanished without a trace. Hikers, campers, and even seasoned outdoorsmen have entered these remote regions and simply never returned. Search parties often come up empty-handed, finding no footprints, no equipment, and no signs of struggle. It's as if these individuals were erased from existence. The patterns are hard to ignore. These incidents tend to occur in regions with known cryptid activity, areas marked by strange barriers or unexplained military presence. It suggests something larger at play, an effort to control or obscure what's really happening in these places. Whether intentional or incidental, these disappearances fuel the growing suspicion that these zones are far from ordinary wilderness. They are places where the rules of nature seem to bend, and where the presence of something unknown lingers just out of sight. All right, now let's get to the interviews. My first interview is a park ranger who worked in the Smoky Mountains, and here's what he had to say.
Well, thanks for having me on. I've never talked about this publicly before, but, yeah, I worked as a park ranger in the Smoky Mountains for over 20 years. I saw a lot of strange things out there, but there's one thing that still keeps me up at night. So, it was late in the season, maybe October or November. I got a call about a few hikers reporting a foul smell and some strange noises in this really isolated area. You know, not the kind of spot most people go to unless they're really adventurous. So, I hiked out there myself to check it out. At first, it seemed normal, you know, just woods. But as I got closer to where the hikers said the smell was, I started finding these carcasses. They were animals, deer mostly, but the way they were torn up didn't make sense. I mean, I've seen bear kills before, mountain lions too, but this was different. The bodies were ripped open, almost like something was angry. And the claw marks, they were huge, way bigger than any animal we're supposed to have out there. So naturally, I radioed it in, told my supervisor what I found, asked if I should take pictures or investigate further. But here's where it gets weird. He cuts me off, doesn't even let me finish, and says, "Pack it up, leave the area, and don't ask questions." I thought that was strange, but you don't argue with your boss, right? So I turned back and headed out. Now, a few days later, I went back to that same area. Not officially, just on my own curiosity, I guess. When I got there, the whole area was different. The carcasses were gone, and there were tire tracks, big ones, like from military vehicles. And I saw something else too. There were these cameras, hidden, you know, up in the trees, pointed at the trails, the clearings. That's not something we ever set up, at least not as park staff. Then, that night, I'm back at the station, and I see this convoy of trucks, military trucks, rolling through. They didn't stop to talk to anyone, didn't explain what they were doing, just headed straight for the restricted part of the park. And the next morning, one of the higher-ups pulls me aside and tells me, flat out, stay out of that area. It's being handled. I don't know what I saw out there, but I'll tell you this. It wasn't normal. The government doesn't just move in like that for bears or coyotes, you know? I started hearing whispers after that from some of the older rangers. They talked about creatures, things people see in the woods that shouldn't be there. Some of them even mentioned skinwalkers, though. I always thought those were just stories. Now, I'm not so sure. I quit a couple years after that. Couldn't shake the feeling that there was more going on in those woods than I'd ever be told. So, yeah, that's what I know. Take it for what it's worth.
Next, we have an interview with a police officer who is stationed just outside of the Smoky Mountains. Here's what he had to say.
I've been in law enforcement for over 15 years now. I've seen my fair share, like strange calls, you know. But this one was different. It was late, probably close to midnight. I was on patrol just outside the Smoky Mountains near the park's perimeter. I got a call from dispatch. There were multiple reports of loud screams. People saying didn't sound like any animal they ever heard. A few even said it sounded human, so I drove out there to check it out. I get out there and I start scanning with my spotlight along the road, looking for just anything unusual. That's when I saw it. It stepped out onto the road, maybe 30, 40 yards ahead of me. It was tall. Had to be at least 7 foot tall. And its eyes glowed. They were like reflecting in my flashlight, but they were super bright. Anyways, it was covered in this dark fur, standing upright like a man. That thing, I mean, there's really just no other explanation other than it's a Sasquatch. I mean, I've seen Sasquatch on TV and shows and everything like that, and I'm telling you, this was definitely a Sasquatch. This wasn't a bear. I know what I saw. I mean, I never thought they were real, but I do now. That thing was massive. My jaw mock hit the road when my brain made the connection of what I was looking at. It stared at me for a few seconds and then just turned and walked right back into the woods. Calm, like, wasn't afraid of me, didn't have a care in the world, just turned and walked in. I called it in, told dispatch what I saw, and I started to head toward where it disappeared into the woods. But before I could get there, I see these headlights come up the road. It's a convoy, like black SUVs in this truck. No markings, no plates. They didn't even slow down as they passed me. I started waving my flashlight at them, but they just like rammed me off the road. And they just headed straight for this thing went. So fast forward to the next day. And so the next morning, I get a call from my captain. He told me to forget what I saw. Said it wasn't my jurisdiction anymore, but the case was closed. I couldn't believe it. I mean, this is a serious situation, right? I saw something out there that shouldn't exist, and they just tell me to drop it. When I pressed him, he got real short with me, almost angry. Told me just to don't ask any more questions. Now that's not normal. That's not how things are supposed to work. So, yeah, that's what happened. I never believed in stuff like Sasquatch before, but after that night, I don't know what else to call it. Whatever it was real. And whoever those men were knew exactly what they were looking for.
Now this next account is from a chat message conversation. You can follow along on the screen. Hey Donovan, I've got a crazy story for you if you're interested. It's something I've been debating whether to share, but I think you might actually believe me. Hey, absolutely, I'm interested. I love crazy stories. What happened? Okay, so this happened about 2 weeks ago. I live near the Smoky Mountains, and I like to go hiking pretty often. Nothing extreme, just trails here and there to clear my head. But this time, I went a little off the beaten path, and I found something I can't explain. I came across this fence. It wasn't marked, no signs, no warnings, but it looked high-tech. Like it had these black panels along the posts, and the whole thing hummed. It was faint, but you could hear it if you got close. I think it was electrified. An electrified fence deep in the woods? That's definitely not normal. How far did it stretch? That's the thing. It went on forever. I tried to follow it for a while, but it just kept going. No end in sight. And then I started feeling weird, like I was being watched. Not just the usual alone in the woods feeling either. This was heavy, almost oppressive. I couldn't shake it. I figured it might be private property or something, but there were no gates, no markings, nothing. Then I saw it. On the other side of the fence, pacing back and forth, was this thing. It was humanoid, but its skin was scaly, kind of a dark green or brown color. Its eyes were huge, like way bigger than ours, and they glowed faintly, almost like a golden color. And its hands, they weren't human. Long fingers, claws at the tips. It looked angry, agitated, like it was trying to figure out a way through the fence. Hold up. Are you telling me you saw a reptilian? Like an actual reptilian humanoid? Yeah, I think so. I've read about them, but I never thought they were real. I mean, this thing was right there, maybe 30 feet away from me, and it was real. No doubt about it, I was frozen. It kept pacing, looking at the fence, then back toward the woods behind it, like it was trapped or trying to escape. Did it notice you? I don't think so, or if it did, it didn't care. But I wasn't about to stick around and find out. The feeling of being watched was getting worse, and I swear I saw something moving in the trees on my side of the fence. I just turned and got out of there as fast as I could. Did you go back to check it out again? No way. I thought about it, but when I told a friend about it, they warned me not to mess with anything like that. They said those kinds of fences are for keeping things in, not out. And after what I saw, I believe it. Wow, that's wild. I'm going to include this on an episode in the future. Thanks for reaching out. I received an email from someone who wishes to remain anonymous. Here's what he had to say. Hi Donovan, I've been following your channel for a while. I can't tell you my name or too many details about myself, but I used to serve in the military. My job took me to a lot of places, some of them pretty remote, and I saw things I never thought I'd see. One assignment I'll never forget was near the Smoky Mountains. It wasn't anything I signed up for. It was just where they sent me. My team's job was to transport special cargo to secure locations. On paper, it was all routine, but in practice, it felt different. The cargo was always sealed tight in reinforced containers, way more secure than anything you'd expect for normal equipment or supplies. We were told not to ask questions, and I learned pretty quickly that the less you know, the better. The code names they used for the cargo stood out to me. Things like Target Alpha, Containment Subject, and sometimes just the asset. I still don't know exactly what was in those containers, but I've got a pretty good idea after what I overheard. During one of our assignments, I picked up bits of conversations between the higher-ups. They didn't think we could hear them, but some of us were paying attention. They talked about breaches and containment failures. One of them mentioned something that escaped the perimeter and caused casualties before it was neutralized. That's how they talked about it. Clinical, cold. Like it was just another problem to fix. The way they acted, it was clear they weren't dealing with anything normal. And I can tell you this, whatever was in those containers wasn't meant for public eyes, and they were desperate to keep it that way. After my time there, I couldn't stop thinking about it. At the time, I didn't have a name for what I might have been dealing with. But now, after hearing stories like the ones you cover, I'm convinced it had to do with something they were keeping contained. Something not human. I wish I could say more, but I've already said too much. Just know this. Those stories about containment zones in the Smoky Mountains aren't just theories. They're real. I have one last email from a resident near the Smoky Mountains. Here's what she had to say. Hi Donovan, I've been living near the Smoky Mountains for over 20 years, and I've seen and heard things I can't explain. I'm not usually one to talk about this kind of stuff. Over the years, I've noticed strange lights in the sky above the woods. They're not like planes or helicopters. Sometimes they hover in one spot, and other times they move erratically, zigzagging before disappearing altogether. It's not every night, but it's frequent enough that I've stopped dismissing it as a fluke. Then there's the noise, or lack of it, I should say. Sometimes when I'm out walking or sitting on my porch, everything just goes silent. No birds, no crickets, nothing. It's like the woods are holding their breath. Other times I've heard sounds that don't make sense. Low growls, high-pitched screeches, and once, what sounded like a deep guttural laugh. It was close, but when I looked, there was nothing there. The weirdest thing, though, has to be the vehicles. Late at night, I've seen unmarked black SUVs driving through town. They don't stop, and they always seem to be heading toward the same area, right up near the edge of the park. A few times I've even seen military trucks following them. No one around here talks about it, but I know I'm not the only one who's noticed. I don't know what's going on, but it feels like something big is being kept from us. There's an uneasiness that's hard to explain, like the woods aren't just woods anymore. Anyway, I thought you might find this interesting.